platform. Now, a nation's conscience often echoes through the voice of its youth. And this week, that voice has been loud, raw, and unyielding. From the streets of Nairobi, protests have surged, not just against police brutality, but in defense of our constitutional values following the death of Albert Ojwang in police custody. The shooting of Hawker Boniface Karaoke injuries to Kenyatta University student, that is Philip Okech, and at least 20 others, as reported by the Kenya National Human Rights Commission, have amplified public outreach. Tonight, we spotlight the rising movement demanding justice, reform, and recognition. What role do students play and the youth within confronting state repression? What is the cost and the power of the youth-led activism? Joining us tonight to unpack this is Zadok Okoth, Secretary General of the Kenyatta University Students Association, who will be with us to break it down. Zadok, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And I'm going to go straight into it because I'd like to get your reflections, particularly concerning the matters that transpired yesterday. I'm curious to know, as a student leader, how was it for you to receive reports that one of the students who you represent within the institution had been injured in the protest, particularly knowing that they had gone to lay support rather for another youth who was lost by brutality particularly, and because we are still ongoing with the matter, but it is quite open that he lost his life within the custody of the police. How was it for you knowing that this student is in danger, or rather is in a terrible situation, while he was going to actually look for recourse for another situation?
Once again, thank you for having me on board. Allow me start by expressing that it's indeed a sad moment in our country, and we're actually questioning the level of state repression that the government has subjected its youth towards. The youth can no longer have their voice, the youth can no longer speak, and we cannot be allowed even our opinions to be taken for the purpose of improving governance and attaining progressive social and economic rights. The shooting of Albert Ojwang, and yesterday, but one, receiving the news that one of our comrade, Philip Okech, had sustained a rubber bullet, stray bullet, that was shot in town, actually made me to react with shock and consternation. It was a little bit nerve-wracking to check that somebody who is innocent, somebody who is speaking their own voice, somebody who is on their mission, and a student who is actually fending for himself and working towards improving or bettering their future, is becoming a subject of state repression. It's more of a grieving, and it becomes questionable whether the government is really working on a just law to ensure the state protects the rights and freedoms of its citizens, or whether the state is there to be the same that is going to injure or rather demean the rights of its people.
And perhaps coming back to the matter of Philip Okech, yesterday he was very spirited as he left the Kenyatta National Hospital. Perhaps you can give us the updates, particularly, is he okay? Is he getting better, or how is he?
As we speak, Philip is getting better, because what he sustained was a stray bullet. And it's also good to clarify, because I saw most of Kenyans really tweeting yesterday in the X space that it must have been a long con or a scripted state. But there is a difference between sustaining a real gunshot and a stray bullet, because this was not a targeted bullet at him. And so he got attacked at the arms and at the neck. And at the arms, there was no penetration of the bullet, but at the neck, the Kenyatta National Hospital doctors were able to extract a rubber bullet. And he's feeling a bit better. Right now, he's at KUTV, where he's still proceeding with his medication.
We really hope that he's going to get better, and also for Boniface Karaoke, who also sustained wounds during the protest. Now, I'm going to come back to the matters of your students within an institution, and probably I think I would be safe to assume that you do understand the Constitution. You have that comprehension of it. When you look at everything that is transpiring within the country currently, what is your deduction particularly? Are the constitutional rights particularly maybe of assembling, expressing yourselves, are these rights being honored currently within the Kenyan setup?
From the word go, actually I'm also a law student, and addressing this matter from a legal aspect, we were taught by my constitutional lecturer that if one article of a constitution is violated, it's an attempt to violate the whole constitution. Take, for example, if right now somebody would decide to overthrow a sitting president, which would be termed as a treason, it is overthrowing the whole constitution. And this constitution, if you check at how the articles are attached to one another, there is a way in which they're inclined so that one article depends on another, and each article sustains one another. And if Article 37 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010 provides for right to peaceful assembly and demonstration, it also means that this constitution is serving based on Article 2, that is sovereignty of the people and supremacy of the constitution, Article 1 and 2. And if this constitution must be based on the people, and these are the people who determined it and set out this right under Article 37 that they can be able to demonstrate, assemble, then you are not giving these people a chance to assemble, demonstrate, or picket in the name of you are micromanaging or stage managing your own policies that you want to be implemented without having a basis. Then to me, it is an overthrow of the whole constitution, and there is no just law, even for people who are arrested during protest to be prosecuted or to be taken for trial. Because if they are being taken for prosecution, what happens then with Tanui, who shoots a protester, who shoots somebody who is just selling mask innocently, and then you say that this person has violated the law by making a violent demonstration that you cannot prove, but the person who has been the killer goes out freely without anything happening. The criminal justice system of our country is very unfair, very unjust, and it lacks transparency absolutely. So,
Sadok, I'm going to come back to you. We're talking about the constitution, and the matters actually, you've noted that you're a law student, which means you have authority in this place. I'm trying to gauge, particularly right now we have a case of an uprising generation that is becoming quite politically aware. That is the Gen Z population and also the youth as a whole. So my query is here because I'd like you to actually give me more clarity and maybe shine light into this matter. When one part of the constitution is maligned or violated, as you've alluded to, from your view, particularly as a young person, and then as a Kenyan who's a young person within the Kenyan setup, what are the risks of this?
violating the constitution or violating any part of the law would definitely mean that we are trying to degrade the rule of law itself. And where there is no rule of law, you can imagine what kind of a country setup it would be. And we need not to forget, we are moving into a generation of elites, people who have gotten basic education, people who have been educated and have been trained. And there is a contrast between our generation and the generation that have existed previously. But what we need to appreciate that Kenyans do not forget where they came from. We still remember the aftermaths of the post-election violence in 2007, 2008. We still remember the unjust nature of the independent constitution, one that the state had absolute power, and even if you check at the criminal system and the theories of punishment, one that used to apply what we call retribution theory, where it was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But as a country, we have appreciated our progressiveness up to the level where we can now say there is a rule of law, and nobody is above the rule of law. Whether it's a sitting president, whether it's a mere person from no background, whether it's a refugee who has sought refuge in Kenya, nobody is above the law, and that law is expected to treat everybody in an equal manner. And therefore, if we are actually trying to violate our own law, then we are just going back as a country to where we came from, where people were being arrested and detained. We had people like Mheshimiwa Raila who are talking about how many years they spent in jail because even the sentencing policies and what used to exist was not based on a constitution that was fair, a constitution that was checking on balancing between the rights of an individual, the rights of another person who has been aggrieved or whose rights has been injured, and the person who has actually found themselves as victims or accused of violating those rights. And that constitution was progressive to the extent that it now discovered what are the circumstances that something can happen. And if we are not going to obey the rule of law or follow our constitution, then to me, our country, we are just going back to the post-independence era.
And perhaps when you look at the protests that were held, particularly on Tuesday, I would like to pick your mind and gauge this. What message, particularly, let's imagine maybe you were not among the protesters, but you represent a group of young people who, if one was there, maybe a significant majority was also there. What is the message, particularly when protesters, in their capacity of expressing themselves, particularly in a peaceful nature, are met by the brute force of the police? What is the message when bullets meet the banners to you?
The message that the government is trying to relay is that it has failed on its duties because the state has a positive obligation towards protecting the rights of its citizens. And when the youth go out there to protest or assemble, they have a mission to achieve. For example, last year, people were on the street to say no to the Finance Bill 2024, which had punitive clauses and propositions that Kenyans could not withstand, knowing that we are a third world country and we know our economic level. This year, Kenyans have been having a clerical call that we want victims who lost their lives during last year's protest. We want victims who have been injured but are still recuperating to be compensated by the government. But that does not happen. The same Kenyans have been extending their voices towards various contentious issues that keep on arising, including corruption within the government that has affected various sectors. And even when we go peacefully to talk about this to the government, nobody hears. People resort to street because even if you ask government now to provide the statement of who have they compensated, since the state and the police, because they act on behalf of the state, took so many lives last year during protest and injured so many people, they cannot provide that exact accountability. What is there is too much promises without action. And this is what the Kenyans are going out to speak about. And as a representative of students, I'm not just speaking as the Secretary General of Kenyatta University, but I represent the wider majority of students in the whole republic, and I understand the context under which comrades are staying and are living. Even to sustain their own lives and to sustain their basic requirements, sometimes most of them it's a hell. I've had the privilege to serve as a Secretary General, but some of these we can curb when we have a government that realizes we should implement progressive social economic rights. And this is what we've been asking for. We've been asking for a government that can acknowledge that when we are under funding of Higher Education Loans Board, the HELB, that it should be released in time so that students are not calling off for the semester and failing to complete their studies in time because of unnecessary delays. When we are on the street, we are calling upon government to listen to us and intervene in matters, new funding model, and agree that the type of information being gathered through the AI, that is the means testing instrument, does not necessarily have factual background of where students are coming from. And we are even suggesting that let them use the sensor mechanism where they can even use Nyumba Kumi initiative and the chiefs to know the actual data of the student level. When we are on the street as comrades, we are talking about the accommodation prices in our universities that we cannot afford. And these are things that government can address, because if you can donate an offering in a church each weekend of 20 million, then this money, if it was to be channeled even through constituency development funds, it was to be channeled to bursaries and given to counties, it could be able to salvage a great population. And that is our message on the ground, that the government is not listening. We are trying it in a peaceful way, nobody is listening. We are trying through protest, we are being killed.
And perhaps to narrow down our conversation, because we are talking about particularly the violence meted by police officers on protesters. You've alluded to various issues that are out there. Is it right to assume from the revelations that you've made that we are bound to face even more protests going forward?
What we have to acknowledge is that power belongs to the people. And when people decide, they take the power from you or they give it to you. And we cannot say that there will be no longer protest if we don't have a solution to the clerical call that Kenyans have been making. These young people have been making out there, have been projecting their voices out there, claiming something that they want to be done, but nobody is actually paying attention to what the young people are asking. And therefore, you cannot expect any better solution than more protest. And one message that I want to say, that you may kill the messengers, but you cannot kill the message. The message will still be there, and until we have a sanitized country, a country where there is going to be absolute transparency and accountability, then what you expect is even worse scenarios.
And just not to move in that direction, I'm looking at the fact that although we had a lot of, for lack of a better word, weird reports after the death of Albert Ojwang, I'm looking at the various instruments of justice moving in step currently. What is your look on this? Does it spell promise, particularly in matters of seeking justice? And also, perhaps I'd like to know, how do you feel about the fact that we had a first report that alleged a certain thing had happened to the late Ojwang, and then a subsequent report that would come out unearthing more and more? First, what is your feeling concerning that as a student leader, particularly concerning such matters, because they touch on young people, they touch even on the general Kenyan populace in matters of security, and at the same time, that we are seeing the cogs of justice somehow being in move. Does that spell promise?
There is no promise in our Kenyan state, and even the moves that have been taken and even the initiatives do not in any way justify the means. You cannot compare the life of a single Kenyan and equate it to a financial value or an amount. And what we need to acknowledge is that this is not an isolated case. These cases have been recurring repeatedly, and even after the murder of Albert Ojwang, there has been another murder. There has been other more injuries. So we cannot talk of promising Kenyans that everything is getting on well, when what you are trying to do is just to continually justify the means. To me, the death of Albert Ojwang must still be probed into, and the killers should be prosecuted, and if possible, we should at least see our law coming into an effect. Having learned some few elements of criminal law where somebody who murders is expected to serve a life sentence, at least we should see some of these constitutional articles coming into life so that we can appreciate the rule of law. And the death of Albert Ojwang, to me, it doesn't matter how many millions is compensated to the family, how much is given. This is just a single isolated case. But what about the other Kenyans, which is no longer a topic of discussion? Right now, Albert Ojwang's issue is the one on the current trend. We have called for government to expediently act on various issues, but there is no action, including compensation of the victims that were injured and over 20 comrades that appeared in the protest of Tuesday. The guy who was just selling his mask and was shot. But you will hear all these become stories, and next week it's again a different story. We don't have any promising.
And Zadok, I have to ask you this, because we are seeing a lot of rather losses within the protest. My question to you is this: as a student leader, as a youth leader, as a youth yourself, do you believe that the motion of protest is the only cause that we have as young people of reshaping Kenyan politics?
Well, I would answer it in two phases. As we speak, once you have made a government, the government has time limits to serve, and the government has jurisdiction within which it should serve its people. And for the youths right now, what we expect is the government implementing the policies appropriately and correctly, implementing the promises that were given to Kenyans, realizing our economic potential, and also ensuring absolute transparency and accountability among state officials, civil servants, so that we are able to utilize the resources that we have. But the other tool that the young people have is to exercise their political rights under Article 38. We are approaching a general election in 2027, and it's again another chance that we have to make a structure of a government that we prefer, a structure of a government that can be able to heed to the people of Kenya, a government that can be able to understand our economic dynamics and can be able to deal with the elephants that we've been talking about in the country. That is one of them, corruption.
Yeah. And Zadok, as we finalize, because I'm being told we are pressed for time, I'd like to poke your mind on this. When the protests were happening, we saw the youth out there on the streets, but there was another section of youth who were beating people with clubs, robbing them within the streets, moving around, and in the subject of being goons. But they're also young people. If you look at them, they are another group of youth. What does this speak to the idea that the youth want to reshape the design of Kenyan politics while we see such things coming about? What does that speak out, particularly in a generation that wants to be trusted with running of this nation?
There's a quote that goes, poverty is the enemy. And when I see a group of youths are in the street to demand for certain rights to be guarded, or rather be implemented by the government, and again a faction of youths are also there to counteract them, it only justifies that statement that poverty is the enemy. These are youth that, to me, I believe are being misused by politicians, by those who are perpetrating their own wills and those who want their own good, self-centered cartels within the nation. And what I could say, that it's unfortunate that as a country right now, Kenya, we are crippling at a horsey and buggy pace towards gaining a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. That at a time when the youth should speak in a united voice and identify their mission to ensure it's achieved, that a faction of the youth would still be subdued and be divided by politicians using petty cash so that they can be able to counteract themselves and to create unnecessary tension and conflict. To me, that is very unnecessary, and I want to send a stern warning to our youths that it is us to protect this country. It is us to own this country, and it is us to guide our future. And it's also us that we can either destroy the lives that we have or make them. If we are not going to talk in unity and identify that this is the mission, we want a fair economic country, we want a country where education is accessible to all categories of people, that we are still going to be divided into factions based on small petty cash and bribes and money that is being obtained through corruption, then we are still having a long way to go.
Thank you very much for that submission, Zadok Okoth, Secretary General, Kenyatta University Students Association. A very impactful discussion we've had here, particularly trying to probe the various issues that are facing the youth and the responsibilities particularly that young people and also students have, because the nation indeed is ours. Thank you very much, Zadok, for that submission, and we really appreciate you coming by KUTV to give us